Hello guys, welcome to another Technical World War II podcast video. Okay, so Chapter 15, D-Day, the Allied invasion of Normandy, Omaha Beach, French coast, June 6, 1944. This is it, men. Pick it up and put it on. You've got a one-way ticket and this is the end of the line. 29, let's go. Loudspeaker announcement. The 29th Infantry Division just before the Allied attack on Normandy. It was a dark, cloudy, freezing cold morning, just past dawn, packed into a floating tin can with walls so high you had to stand on your toes to look over them. 30 men rocked through the misty ocean spray on 5-foot waves that lifted their boat high in the air and dropped it hard, giving everyone that feeling you get on a roller coaster. Some men were praying, some were hurling, others were using their helmets to scoop up the ankle-deep seawater that had built up on the floor of the landing craft assault, LCA. A sharp whistling overhead was followed by a rumbling explosion off in the distance. Back out in the English Channel, Allied warships were chucking huge artillery shells at unseen targets on the coast ahead. Spitfires and B-17s streaked over, moving to targets farther inland. The Coast Guardsmen at the helm turned and screamed over the roar of the ocean. 2 minutes! More whistling. This time, however, it was followed by a huge explosion and a pillar of water blasting high into the air. Officers yelled to keep heads down. Bullets fired from an unseen enemy pinged off the solid plate that was going to be the boat's landing ramp or splashed into the ocean beyond. Nearby, another LCA took a direct hit from an 88mm coastal artillery shell and was ripped apart in a ball of fire that sent men flying in every direction. Another craft struck an anti-ship mine hidden deep beneath the waves. The explosion blew off the bottom half of the boat, dumping its soldiers into the ocean. Most of them didn't resurface. 30 seconds! Men grabbed their rifles. The Coast Guardsmen, steering by looking through a tiny slit in the steel plating of the ship, took a quick turn to avoid a mine that just barely peeked above the surface of the water. With a jolt, the LCA touched ground. The metal landing ramp slammed down. Almost immediately, a spray of machine gun fire killed or wounded every man in the front of the ship. Those lucky enough to get through the screams, pinging, and thumps of bullets found themselves in waist-deep water, weighed down by 60-pound backpacks. They needed to run 50 yards to the sandy beach and then another 100 yards across open ground in broad daylight to a seawall. Beyond that, along towering gray cliffs were perfect views of the beach, where 2,000 German soldiers from the battle-hardened 352nd Infantry. They were hidden along the bluffs in bulletproof concrete bunkers, outfitted with anti-tank cannons, mortars, and at least 85 MG-42 machine guns, rapid-firing weapons known as Hitler's buzzsaw. It was 6:30 a.m. on June 6, 1944, just off the coast of the beach codenamed Omaha on Allied planning maps. 100 LCA vehicles were unloading 3,000 men from the American 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions onto the shores of Nazi-occupied France. D-Day had begun. American losses in the first hour of D-Day on bloody Omaha were horrific. German machine gunners, perfectly sighting in on the LCA craft, fired until their gun barrels were too hot to touch, spraying the entire beach with bullets from dozens of directions at once. Struggling with their gear and not exactly excited about the idea of running up a cliff toward 85 machine guns, the Americans still pressed forward, knowing that this was just the tip of the overwhelming assault that was now beginning. From his LCA, just off the coast, Brigadier General Norman Dutch Coda watched with his fists clenched As the first wave of soldiers was hammered by a ferocious storm of gunfire, four of the men of his 29th Infantry Division, mostly Virginia and Maryland National Guardsmen, this was the first combat they had seen in the war. Some of them had lost their guns in the confusion, or their weapons became so jammed with sand and water they wouldn't fire. Only about a third made it to the seawall. The rest were now scrambling for non-existent cover or lying dead in the sand. The 1st Infantry, veteran warriors who had served in North Africa, were doing only slightly better. Dutch's heart was with both units on Omaha that day. He had been the chief of staff in the 1st Infantry Division during their battles with Rommel's Afrika Corps, and in the summer 1943 had become the assistant commander of the 29th Infantry. He couldn't just sit there and watch his men get massacred. They needed leadership. They needed to get off that beach, storm the cliffs, move into the French towns beyond, and hooked up with the men of the 82nd, 101st, and British 6th Airborne, who had parachuted in the night before and were now fighting for their lives. Dutch told his driver, okay, I lost the page again, to take the LCA in, even though the mission plan didn't say anything about an assistant division commander hitting the beach with the second wave of infantry like some kind of suicidal lunatic. The LCA driver, a Royal Navy guy, cranked the engine. Along the way, the LCA struck a mine, but for some reason it failed to explode, and Dutch's boat kept flying. As it approached the coast, the ramp dropped hard into the ocean, and an immediate spray of German machine gun fire killed a major and 2 staff officers. Brigadier General Dutch Coda had a walking stick and an unlit cigar in his mouth, and his helmet's chin strap was unhooked. He was the only man in the 29th who was allowed to wear it this way. He calmly made his way past the burning hulk of a Sherman tank and started the 150 yards through knee-deep water toward the men at the seawall. To his left, an American colonel ran out of his boat, firing a Bren machine gun from the hip, peppering the bluffs with bullets. At the seawall, disorganized troops from 29th, the 1st, and the 5th Ranger battalions hunkered behind the rocks, keeping their heads down as bullets whizzed past a ricochet off the stone. Enemy artillery and mortar shells ranged closer with each shot, trying to blast them. Then, out of nowhere, a 50-year-old man with a walking stick in one hand and a Colt .45 caliber automatic pistol in the other came hustling up. He said he was in charge now. Forget the mission plan, he told the men. We're not going up the path. We're climbing the bluff, and we're going to take these guys out. Then, famously, he told the 5th Rangers, Rangers, lead the way. This is the U.S. Army's Rangers motto to this day. Grabbing some cover, Coda redirected a soldier with a Browning automatic rifle, also known as a BAR, a rapid-fire assault rifle, to open fire on the enemy machine gun nest. You don't have to kill them or even aim, he said. Just put a lot of bullets close enough that they keep their heads down and stop shooting for a second. Then he ordered the guy to use a Bangalore mine, basically a bomb on the end of the stick, to blast through a thick hunk of barbed wire on the other side of the seawall. When he ordered his men to charge ahead, the first guy through the broken wire was ripped up by an enemy machine gun and died immediately. Everyone else lost their nerve. Knowing what he had to do to make this mission work, Dutch Coda got up and ran through the broken wire, firing his pistol all the way. When the rest of the men saw their ultra-brave division commander racing ahead like a stone-cold warrior, they followed him immediately. Dutch Coda was in pretty good shape, and he personally led the way for the men of the 29th. He took them 100 yards through a minefield, broke into the enemy trench, wiped out the defenders, and then followed the trench to the base of the bluffs. From there, he, the Rangers, and 29th Infantry made it up the bluffs, taking out bunkers and clearing enemy positions with hand grenades, M1 rifles, 45 caliber pistols, and rapid fire from BARs and Tommy guns. Fighting every step of the way, Coda's makeshift command reached the top of the bluff, went a quarter-mile off the coast, entered the town of Veerville, and linked up with troops from the 101st Airborne. But Dutch Coda wasn't done. His men needed him, so he went back to Omaha Beach. With just a handful of men watching his back, Coda made his way to the beach, capturing 5 German soldiers in the process, and found another group of men from the 3rd and 4th Assault Wave backed up against the seawall, screaming, waving his pistol, and shouting orders. Coda ordered these guys to get up and moving. When he saw a perfectly operational bulldozer lying unmanned on the beach, he calmly asked, "Does anyone know how to drive this thing?" Some kid spoke up, and Coda just slapped it on the back and said, "That's the stuff." The kid then spent the rest of the day bulldozing parts of the beach to make it easier for troops to get up the beach. More men moved up and off the coastline. All along the English Channel, LCAs steamed ahead, bringing soldiers, trucks, supplies, and weapons. At one point, a British destroyer sailed right up to the beach and fired point-blank range shots into the bluff to continue clearing the Germans away. Army engineers braved incredible fire to clear out obstacles and make paths for more landing craft to reach safely. By nightfall, American forces would be a mile inland. Omaha was just one of the 6 beaches hit by the Allies during the D-Day invasion, but it was by far the bloodiest. A total of 4,413 men were dead, wounded, or missing in the attack, but the landing had succeeded. By the end of June, 850,000 Allied troops, 148,000 vehicles, and 570,000 tons of supplies had been brought from England and unloaded into France. It was the beginning of the end for Hitler's power in Europe. The apple doesn't fall far. The only other general to land in the early waves of soldiers on D-Day was Brigadier General Teddy Roosevelt Jr., one of the famous and awesomely over-the-top American president. Even though this 57-year-old officer had arthritis and a heart condition and had to walk with a cane, he specifically asked to be in the first wave of soldiers at Utah Beach, going ashore with his 4th Infantry Division. Utah wasn't as bad as Omaha, but as mortars rained explosives down on the landing zones, people noted that T.R. Jr. acted more annoyed than afraid. The 4th suffered fewer than 200 casualties, but he bravely stood up on the beach, directing troops, giving orders, and helping bring men ashore. Thanks to him, the 4th had unloaded 20,000 men and 18,000 vehicles by nightfall and had already linked with members of the 101st Airborne and city beyond. I like it. I like Ike. Coordinating the armies of America, the United Kingdom, Poland, France, and a couple of other countries as they prepare to undertake the largest land and sea operation in human history isn't exactly the same thing as ordering a Happy Meal at McDonald's. So to keep everything under control, the Allies appointed American General Dwight D. Ike Eisenhower to be Supreme Allied Commander, a mild-mannered Texan, yes, there is such a thing, who had basically built the Army Tank Corps from scratch. Ike had one main gift. He could get a lot of fury, wildly different personalities to work together. He kept guys like Patton, more about him here, and Montgomery from killing each other, coordinated airdrops and supply lines, and did an excellent job of running the entire Allied war in the West smoothly. After World War II, he would command NATO in Europe, then be elected to the first of two terms as President of the United States in 1953. As president, Ike negotiated the end of the Korean War, ended racial segregation in military, signed 2 civil rights acts into law, and created the idea of constructing interstate highways. Operation Valkyrie. After the Normandy campaign, Erwin Rommel told Hitler that the war was over. Echoing other German officers, Rommel said that rather than sacrifice German lives, it was time to make peace with the United States and Britain to direct the Germans' efforts against the Russians instead. Hitler angrily refused. A month later, on July 20th, 1944, a group of German army officers, led by an eye patch-wearing colonel named Klaus von Stauffenberg, rigged up a briefcase bomb and put it under a desk in Hitler's war strategy room. The bomb demolished the room, blowing Hitler's pants off and killing 3 of his men, but the Führer lived. And he wasn't really happy about almost being disintegrated by plastic explosives. He ordered the arrest and execution of nearly 5,000 people in connection with the plot. To this day, we don't know whether Rommel was in on it, but nevertheless, the Gestapo gave the popular commander 2 options: kill yourself, or we will arrest you and kill your family. He committed suicide on October 14, 1944, and was buried with full military honors. That's a lot of people. The standard operational infantry unit in the United States military during World War II was the division, which consisted of roughly 14,250 men arranged into 3 regiments. The Army fielded 90 divisions in the war, 68 in Europe and 22 in the Pacific. As of January 1944, there were 4.5 million men in the U.S. Army, a number that included the 1.8 million members of the United States Army Air Force. The Air Force hadn't broken up and become its own service branch yet. The Marine Corps had another 6 divisions of their own, totaling about 405,000 men. The Navy fielded an additional 2 million troops, including 172,000 members of the U.S. Coast Guard. Canadians in the war. Anyone who thinks Canadians are all a bunch of easygoing, laid-back, super polite pushovers just needs to watch a professional hockey game or a documentary on lumberjacking to realize that these are some of the roughest people in North America. Canadian forces were there on the front lines at D-Day, storming the coast at Juno Beach. Despite heavy enemy opposition, they had provided some of the most intensely hard-fighting soldiers in the entire Allied forces. It's for a good reason that Winston Churchill once said, "If I had English officers, Canadian soldiers, and American technology, I could conquer the world." Here are just a few of their stories. Smokey Smith. Ernest Smokey Smith was such a bad kid in school that when World War II broke out, he drove to another city to enlist in the army because he didn't want to be stationed in the same military unit as his teachers. He was promoted from private to corporal 9 times during the war, but all 9 times he was dropped back down to private because he never listened to orders, and he had a bad habit of only showing up for duty when there was a battle to fight. He still was a good guy to have on your side, though. In one battle, his unit was attacked by German tanks and infantry, so Smokey grabbed a bazooka and a Tommy gun and went on a one-man rampage, shredding Nazi tanks at point-blank range. In another epic battle, Smith destroyed 3 German Panther tanks, a half-track, a self-propelled artillery piece, and a scout car, took out nearly 30 German soldiers, and heroically pulled a wounded friend out in the middle of the battlefield. This one, Leo Major. This one-eyed French-Canadian sniper performed tons of awesomely heroic deeds of ridiculousness during the Second World War, but none of them came close to the time he liberated the Dutch town of Zwolle all by himself. Major wore a cold Nick Fury-style pirate eye patch because he'd taken a Nazi grenade to the face during the Normandy campaign. In April 1945, he and another guy volunteered to scout ahead of the main Canadian forces and see what was going on in Zwolle. Well, as he was peering through his scope to see what was up, a German machine gun spotted him, opened fire, and killed Major's best friend. Leo slung 3 machine guns over his back, grabbed a sack of hand grenades, and ran screaming into town, hurling bombs everywhere. He kicked open a door of the SS officer's dining room and riddled it with bullets. He burned down the headquarters of the Gestapo. The Nazis, thinking they were under attack by an entire army, bolted, leaving the town solely in the hands of Leo Major. Tommy Prince, a member of the broken-head band of the Ojibwe Indian tribe in rural Manitoba, Canada, Tommy Prince was the toughest and most feared man in the Devil's Brigade, an elite unit of American and Canadian soldiers. An expert in wilderness survival and tracking, Prince could allegedly travel through the thickest forest at a dead run without making a sound, and was such a killer marksman that he could put 6 bullets through an ace of spades from 100 feet away. Undertaking commando operations in Italy and Germany, Prince became a specialty of sneaking into German bases in the middle of the night and silently kill everyone in their sleep. Well, usually he'd kill them. Sometimes he'd just steal their boots off their feet or tie their shoelaces together as a way of scaring the crap out of them. James Doohan. If you had ever watched the original Star Trek TV show, you'd probably be pretty surprised to find out the guy who played Scotty isn't actually Scottish. He's Canadian, and that accent he has on the show is totally fake. James Doohan left his abusive family as a teenager and enlisted in the Royal Canadian Artillery, deploying at Juno Beach during the Normandy landings. Rushing ahead into a hail of gunfire, Doohan killed 2 snipers and was wounded 6 times in the chest, hand, and leg. As soon as he was recovered, he transferred to the Air Force and became a pilot, where he was infamous for flying his Hurricane at altitude so low that he could maneuver underneath the wires on a telephone pole.